Him, and it's really good for us to be with all of you. We are so glad to be here at Centerville Community Church for the Refresh and Reset Marriage Conference. I'm a pastor as well, and our church is just down the road in Liberty Township, so I'm thrilled that some of the folks from our congregation are here. And as I was working around here talking to some folks, there are people from other local congregations that are part of the conference, and those of you who are watching online, we're so glad to have you as part of it. Even as recently as last night, we had somebody reach out to us. We have a prayer team of people, about 2,000 people that are praying for this conference this weekend. And one of our prayer team members reached out saying they knew somebody who needed to be part of the conference, but they're out east, and could they get the link? And so I was able to contact Pastor Kedrick from here. He got me the link. I was able to get it to those folks. And so we have people literally around the United States that are participating in this conference as well. For Heidi and me, we are so excited. This first session we're going to be talking about is how to build your marriage through healthy communication. And if you've got your little notebooks there should be an outline inside, and you all got a pen so you can follow along. So I want to make sure that you're able to take notes as much as you want to as we go through this. But before we begin, what I'd like to do is start with a word of prayer. So would you bow with me, please, in prayer? Heavenly Father, we do want to thank you so much for the opportunity we have to be here right now in this place, whether we're here physically or we're here online. I thank you, Father, too, that you are sovereign, that it is by your plan that we are all here. I pray that today is an opportunity not only to be refreshed and kind of get a reset in our marriage, but it's an opportunity for us to hear from you. Even if it's things that outside of what Heidi and I say, it's just being here in this context, that there will be nudges and moves of your spirit on our spirits to take a strong, healthy marriage and make it even stronger. Or maybe for those who are hurting and broken and they're just kind of hanging on, Lord, we pray that you would give them the traction and the hope and the tools that they need today to take the important next steps in building their marriage. So, Lord, we give you this time, and we look forward to what you're going to do. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, a few years ago, there was a video that was kind of going viral online, and it really kind of portrayed well some of the challenges that can take place in marriage when it comes to communication. So I just want to kick off our time by having you take a look at this video.
There's all this pressure, and sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless, and I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
Yeah, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See,
out.
you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just... Sometimes it's like there's this achy... I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. All of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Come on. If you would just...
Don't.
Try to see things my way.
All right, well, that kind of gives you an idea. Maybe you don't have the nail in your head, but a lot of us have gone through conversations like that in the context of our marriage. Getting our message across can seem like an easy thing to do. It should be, right? It's just trying to get our message across to our spouse, to somebody that we're married with, somebody that we know intimately, and yet for some reason, we can mess it up. In college, I was a speech communications major. So I spent 4 years studying speech communications. Thousands of dollars went into this, and I still mess it up in the context of marriage. I want to give you an idea of just how complex communication can be as a couple. I'm going to show you a real simple illustration up here on the side screens and kind of walk you through this. So let's just say you've got a sender. Let's say a family has just had dinner, and this is a very simple communication cycle, but a family's just had dinner, and they had lasagna for dinner, and whoever's going to do the dishes is looking at the lasagna pan, and they're thinking, it's going to take a little extra work to clean that pan. the food's caked into it and such. And so, they're thinking about that, and they're thinking about how the family's going to be doing like homework, and they're going to be in the family room, and it's going to take a little longer to get in there. And so in all innocence, in an effort to just let their spouse know it's going to be a little longer till they get in there, they just say, that pan is really caked with lasagna. Okay, that's all they say. That pan is really caked with lasagna. Now, so that's the message that they sent. Now the receiver, their spouse, hears those words, that pan is really caked with lasagna. And then they process that through, well, if they had to clean that pan, they wouldn't want to clean that pan. And furthermore, when they grew up, their parents would always hint when they wanted them to do something, and now they have a boss that hints when they want them to do something. And there's a lot of things already on their plate that they've got to deal with. So they hear the pan is really caked with lasagna. They process it through all those things, and in a nanosecond, they feed back to their spouse, I hate it when you always hint when you want me to do something. Can't you just come right out and say it instead of beating around the bush? Well, now they've gotten this feedback from their simple, innocent statement that pan is caked with lasagna, and they've been unjustly treated. And they process that through the fact that when they were a kid, they were always the one that was blamed for things, and it never was their fault. And then growing up, they would get blamed for things, and it wasn't their fault. And now they've been unjustly accused in marriage, and it's not their fault. And so they fire back, and an all-out war ensues over that pan is really caked with lasagna. And that's just the words. There's even more that takes place in communication. There's a guy, his name is Albert Morabian, and Albert Morabian was a UCLA prof, and he did a study and some research a number of years ago that sometimes is misrepresented, but he said, when somebody is talking about their own feelings and their own attitudes and they communicate, we'll show you here what is communicated. So first of all, 7% of what's communicated is just the words. 38% is the tone of voice. 55% is body language. So when we're communicating, only 7% is words. The rest of it is our tone of voice and body language. Let me show you how this plays out, okay? Let me just show you. I love you. Okay? Yeah, sorry. Or, I love you.
Love you too.
Get the difference. Same words, different tone of voice, different body language. Same thing can happen with the words I'm sorry or anything else that we communicate in the context of our marriage. Now, it doesn't apply to all communication, but it applies to a lot of it. And it applies to our marriage and how we communicate with our spouse and what we're trying to get across with our spouse. And sometimes it can just be the softness of our voice. Sometimes it can be leaning in to listen. Or whether or not we're even giving them our attention because we're looking at a screen or something else and, not really giving them our full presence. Sometimes it can be the sharpness of our voice or clenching of our teeth, and it communicates things that maybe we don't even mean to communicate. So several years ago, I was working at a church in Michigan, and I learned that one of our staff members thought I was angry with them during a particular meeting. And I remembered that meeting really well, and there was nothing in me that was angry. But what it was my body language was totally communicating something different than what was going on inside. They were communicating something, it was a plan or something that they were passionate about, and I was interested. So I was leaning in, and I was really concentrating hard to hear what they were saying. But everything in my face communicated anger instead of interest. And so what I had to do was I had to start learning, what is it like to be looking at me when somebody is communicating to me? So I had to be more self-aware and learn, okay, so what's my body language communicating? What's my face communicating? So when somebody's talking to me now, I'm like, oh, really? I'm just trying to open up my face so that I'm communicating the right things. Well, it's the same thing in marriage. Sometimes it means we need to have greater self-awareness in the way that we are communicating the nonverbals, the body language, the tone of voice, the eye contact. In fact, it's been said that the eyes are the window to the soul. And so often in marriage, we get busy, we get distracted, we've got kids, we've got things to tend to, we've got screens that we keep looking at. There's all kinds of things that keep us from actually looking our spouse in the eye. And so what we want to do is we want to just do a marital exercise with everybody here. And here's what it is. We're going to take 3 minutes. and you're going to turn and you're going to look in your spouse's eyes, and you're not going to say anything. All right? Now, let me just say, this is not a contest. This is not a stare down. You're allowed to blink, okay? So that's fine. I'm going to be over here doing it with Heidi too, although we're going to check on you every now and then, all right? So the room should be quiet, other than maybe some snickers here and there, all right? But you're going to have 3 minutes to totally look your spouse in the eye and not say anything. For some of you, it may have been a long time since you've done this before. So I've got a stopwatch on my watch. I'm going to get the stopwatch ready, so don't worry. I'll be timing it for all of us. I'll tell you when to start. Maybe some of you have already gotten to start because you think that it's a race or something. It's not. But here we go. Okay, so you've got 3 minutes. You're going to look your spouse in the eye. Don't say anything. Just look. Here we go. And stop. Oh man, there's like a sigh of relief in the room. If anybody came in like while we were doing that stare down, they were like, what in the world's going on? What kind of conference is this? Come on, honey, we're getting out of here, Good job. It's interesting. Sometimes when people have done this exercise, they've reported later that they were actually crying a little bit during it because it had been so long since they had looked each other in the eyes. And that eye contact exercise is huge because it just reminds us, this is a refresh and reset. It's almost a reset into the fact that we have forgotten the beauty of what it is to look into our spouse's eyes and to look deeply into their heart and into their soul. That same exercise has been done with strangers before, and they've done it for 4 minutes long. And the power of that emotional connection that takes place from looking somebody in the eye is huge. And when you're doing that with your spouse, I just encourage you to continue to work on that eye contact as well. It's just a way that we can connect at a deeper level. Another way that we can connect at a deeper level in our marriages is just through the importance of empathy. I mean, think about this. Every person in this room, all of us, and all of you who are watching online, every one of us wants to be understood. We want to be known. We want to know that somebody gets what we are going through because it helps us to feel connected to them. So like when couples are dating, when you were dating each other, you would be pursuing each other's heart and you'd be listening and you'd be caring and you'd be connecting. But somehow over the course of time, we sort of lose that effort and that initiative and even the skill of what it is to connect. People want someone who can show that they care. A great example of this is a few years ago, the Boston Globe told the story about a young man. His name is Ryan Fitzgerald. And Ryan Fitzgerald is a 20-year-old guy at the time who was unemployed. He was living with his dad. He had some time on his hands. And so he decided that he was just going to make a YouTube video and put his phone number on it and communicate on that YouTube video that he was willing to just listen to anybody who wanted somebody who would listen. And so he put it out there, and on his video, he just says, I never met you, but I do care, and if you'd like somebody who would just give you an ear to listen, I'd be happy to do that. All right, ready for this? In the first weekend, he had 5,000 phone calls and text messages. 5,000. And he said, later in an interview, he said, some people's own mothers won't take the time to sit down and talk with them and have a conversation, but some stranger on YouTube will. He said, after 6 seconds, you're not a stranger anymore. You're a new kid that I just met. In our work with couples, we've talked with couples time and again who've just said things like, we don't seem to connect in our marriage. We're nice with each other. We kind of do the family business. We talk about the kids. We talk about what needs to get done. We kind of go through things. We go out with friends. We attend church, all those kinds of things. But we just don't seem to be connecting. And there is an inner yearning for that deeper sense of connecting with one another. And maybe you felt that way in your marriage too, where life is good. It's not like things are bad or catastrophic or anything, but you're just inside, you're just longing for a deeper connection, not with somebody out there, but with your spouse. And somehow the two of you are missing that. Well, one of the keys to connecting at a deeper level is just learning this whole skill of empathy and putting it into practice. Empathy doesn't just feel sorry for somebody. That's not what empathy is. Empathy actually goes deeper, and it tries to connect and identify with your spouse and what they're going through. Empathy basically says, look, whatever it is you're facing, as I hear this, I want you to know that you're not alone. We're in this together. The Apostle Paul wrote about this. He said, rejoice with those who rejoice. You weep with those who weep. If some of you know the story about Job in the Bible and how Job went through all kinds of hardship. He lost family members, he lost his kids, he lost his home, he lost his health, he lost his wealth, he lost all kinds of things. And things were just as bad as they could possibly get. And Job had some friends who heard about what he was going through. And so these friends coordinated a time and a place where they were going to meet up, and they were going to go and be with Job in his pain. And so they did that. They came and they sat with Job, and they were silent with him in his pain for 7 days, just entering in and being with him in his pain. They didn't say anything. In fact, what's interesting, Jewish people still do this today. Some of you who come maybe from a Jewish background, you know what this is. It's sitting Shiva. It's when a loved one is lost, and after the burial, the family members will go back to a family member's home, and they will sit in that home for 7 days, receiving guests. And generally the protocol is that you don't say anything until the mourners say something to you first. So that's what Job's friends were doing. And they did a good job of entering into his pain until they opened up their mouths and started to tell him why he was going through his pain. And that's a whole different story. In the New Testament, there's a story about some guys who had a friend who was a quadriplegic. This guy couldn't walk. He couldn't get to Jesus. He couldn't be healed. And his friends entered into his pain. And their entering into his pain moved them to action, which is compassion. So it's entering in, and then it's doing something about it. And so they carried their buddy who couldn't get to Jesus. And then they got creative about how they were going to get their friend to Jesus because the room was packed. And so they took him up on the roof. And the roofs back then were made of mud. And so they were able to dig a hole through the roof and lower their friend down. And their friend was healed. But it was that practice of entering into their friend's pain that made all the difference. Empathy is bringing the ability to feel with your spouse into your marriage. It's not having something fixed, it's actually having something felt. And sometimes that's all that's needed. It's just the ability to feel with your spouse. Sometimes that leads to compassion, sometimes it just leads to connection. There's a video we want to show you, and it's an animation. And the voiceover on it is a lady, her name is Dr. Brene Brown. And while we don't endorse everything that she teaches, she has some great things to say about empathy and what it is. So we want you to take a look at this before we talk about how we can practice empathy in our marriage.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So as you watch that video, one of my biggest takeaways from that were the words "at least." When I first saw that, I realized how often I said the words "at least" when Heidi would be sharing something with me, and I would be like, well, at least this didn't happen, or at least that didn't happen, or at least you have this, or at least whatever. And what that ended up doing was actually taking away the opportunity for us to connect and for empathy to take place in the context of our marriage. I want to give 3 keys about learning how to connect in empathy. And let me just say, empathy is a skill. And it's something that you can learn, something you can practice in your marriage. So the first thing just to remember is that you are feeling what they are feeling. So often what can happen is that when our spouse shares something with us, we can actually use what they are feeling and actually springboard from that into whatever it is we are feeling or hijack the moment. So our spouse says, I had a really rough day. Oh, you did? Oh my goodness. Me too. Let me tell you about my day. And then we go off onto our thing instead of entering into whatever their day was or whatever it is that they are telling us about. We miss the opportunity. So what we can do instead is, let's just say at the end of the day, when the two of you are going to be connecting, either having gone away to work or coming out of the office at home, and you have the opportunity to talk to each other, ahead of time be thinking things like, I wonder what their day has been like. I wonder what stresses they've been going through. I wonder what life has been like in their shoes. When we connect, what emotions am I picking up that they are displaying? Your spouse explains that they had a tough day. Your response instead can just be, it sounds like it was really hard. Kind of like the guy in the It's Not About the Nail video where he said, that must be really hard. Well, just that in itself, while it was funny, it was connection and it was empathy, and that's what she wanted. Now, she did need to get the nail out of her head, I'm just saying. But that aside, what he was expressing was the empathy, and that's what she was looking for in that opportunity. So in your attempts to connect at a deeper level, make sure that you refrain from trying to fix or minimize whatever it is your spouse expresses. Second, be okay with missed attempts. You know, if you're just learning how to practice empathy and you're leaving this refresh and reset conference and you're like, man, that's something I really do need to work on, and maybe your spouse has nudged you or like, you know, that is kind of what I'm looking for, and you're going, okay, let's give it a shot. And so you start working on it. It may be that your first few attempts are not going to connect like you want them to, or your spouse doesn't feel like they've connected. And it would be very easy just to say, you know what, fine. I tried it. It didn't work. I'm giving up. It's not going to work. Don't do that. Give yourself grace. Hang in there. For your marriage, continue to practice and work on empathy. You can do it. It's a learned skill, but you can do it. It just takes time to figure it out. And the third thing is, affirm what you hear. As you connect with your spouse's feelings, you have the opportunity to validate your spouse. Their feelings are their feelings, so you get to acknowledge them. Just simply, as you're listening, simply thank them for what it is that they've shared. You know, what they've felt, what they've said. Empathy is about support. It's not about judging their heart. It's not about correcting them or casting your vote on whether they're right or whether they're wrong about what they're saying or whatever it is. You connect with empathy without expressing your opinion and without correction.
We're going to focus now on how to listen. There's a story that's told of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he often had to endure long receiving lines at the White House. And FDR, as you know, suffered from polio, so he didn't stand up when he was in these receiving lines. Instead, he sat down in his wheelchair, and people would come through. And he complained one day, he said, "Nobody ever pays any attention to what I say." And so he decided that he was going to try an experiment. And so as he was sitting in his wheelchair and people came down through the line, he decided that he was going to murmur this particular phrase. He was going to say, "I murdered my grandmother this morning." So people are coming through the line, and he's sitting there and he's shaking everybody's hand, and he's saying, "I murdered my grandmother this morning." Well, it was fascinating because the guests responded with phrases like, "Mr. President, that's marvelous." Or they'd say, "Keep up the good work." Some even said, "We are so proud of you." Some said, "God bless you, Mr. President." It wasn't till the last person was coming through that line, and it happened to be the ambassador from Bolivia, that the president's words were actually heard. Unfazed, the Bolivian ambassador leaned over and he said to FDR, "Well, I'm sure your grandmother had it coming." That ambassador had excellent listening skills. So how do we listen to our spouse? The first way is to practice something called reflective listening. Have you ever said something to your spouse and had your spouse totally misunderstand what you said? It's happened to us. Or has your spouse responded in such a way that you could tell they weren't really listening to you? I know it's happened to Brad. It's happened to me. It's kind of like what FDR experienced. When it comes to listening, here's how to break into that cycle and actually hear what each other is saying. It's a technique called reflective listening or mirroring. And it's a powerful way to understand each other and hopefully minimize miscommunication in your marriage. Here's how it works. Your spouse comes to you and they tell you something or they describe something to you, and you stop what you're doing, you turn, you look at your spouse, you give them your full attention, and you listen carefully. Then when they're done, you repeat back in your own words what you think you've heard. This gives your spouse the opportunity to clarify until you get it. And sometimes for Brad and me, this is where we get into trouble. You know, one of us will be talking, and then it's like, "No, that's not what I said." And we'll have to keep going back and forth over and over till we're sure that we've really heard each other. And then once your spouse is convinced that he or she has actually been heard, then and only then do you respond. Here's some common reflective statements that you can use. So what you're thinking is, you're saying that you feel blank. Can you tell me more about that? Help me understand. As couples, try it today. Try it when you leave this conference. Try it this week. It may take some practice, but these are tools that can help your spouse to feel heard. Another important aspect of listening is just simply learning to ask the right questions. Brad and I love people. We're both extroverts, and we enjoy talking to all kinds of people. We love being with people. We like to ask them tons of questions so that we can get to know them better. And we've learned that every single person has a story. And when you focus on others, it makes them feel cared for, and it makes them feel valued. It's no different in marriage. That's one of the reasons why you got married. You wanted to feel loved. You wanted to feel cared for. And we all want to be known by our spouse. I want you to take a minute and listen to the lyrics of this chorus by Toby Keith. Hear what he said? He said, "What I think, what I like, what I know, what I want, what I see, I like talking about you usually, but occasionally I want to talk about me." And what he's saying is that in communication in marriage, we need to talk about both of us. We need to talk about our spouse, we need to listen, and our spouse needs to allow us to talk about ourselves and also listen. Have you ever had, if you're a girl here, have you ever had a girlfriend and you went out for coffee with her? Or if you're a guy, maybe you also went out for coffee with a guy friend, and you're sitting there at the table, and your friend just talks about herself the whole time. And after you leave that place, you're like, wow, I really know a lot about her. But she didn't ask me one question about myself. And you realize she doesn't know anything about you. Or maybe that same friend, you went out to coffee with her, and all she did was pummel you with questions. And you leave and you're like, wow, she knows all about me, but I don't know anything about her. You don't want to have that situation in your marriage. It needs to be a give and take. You have to show interest both ways. So I want you to take a minute and just think about yourself. Do you ask your spouse questions? Do you show interest in them? Or do you just talk about yourself? Hopefully, you do both. We're going to continue with some of the ways that we can all take our conversations with our spouse to a deeper level and hopefully improve our listening skills. The next way is to ask open-ended questions. Instead of saying to your spouse, "How was your day?" and your spouse can just go, "Nah, it was fine." Or they can go, "Nah, good." Ask a question like, "Hey, honey, what was the best part of your day today?" Or, "What activities took up most of your time today?" Ask questions where your spouse simply can't give a one-word answer. And then when your spouse responds, dig deeper. Ask follow-up questions. Say something like, "I can see why you were so busy with those activities. Which one did you like the best? Why?" When we listen and when we ask our spouse questions, it helps us enter into our spouse's world. You can say something like, "Tell me more about that project. That sounds really interesting." Or, "I'd like to hear more about the book club you attended." Or, "I know you said Susie's your best friend. What do you really like about her?" And then as your spouse is talking, look and don't interrupt. When your spouse is talking, give them your full attention and refrain from making any comments until they're done. It comes back to that whole whole exercise we just did on eye contact. Several years ago, Brad and I were eating in a restaurant, and we looked across the aisle, and I want to show you a picture of what we saw. Here's a family, and they're out to dinner, and every single person, every member of this family is on their phone. I thought it was amazing. And we just watched them through the whole meal. They never got off. Even when they were eating, they were kind of still on their phones and, taking bites. They didn't talk to each other. And we thought that is so sad, because what it communicated to us was that whoever they were talking with out there was way more important than the family they were with right in front of them. The next thing is know when to stop asking questions. Remember, your spouse isn't being interrogated by you. When they get quiet and their demeanor changes, then stop asking questions. A good way to do this is to look at your spouse and just say, "Anything else?" And if your spouse says no, then just move on, because you know what? Sometimes there really isn't anything else left to say.
And our goal in this session is just to give you a lot of tools in your toolkit to help build your marriage with communication. And so we're giving you things so that as you go home, you're able to kind of go back to your notes and refresh yourself and use these tools so that you can strengthen the communication that takes place in your marriage. And one of the things that's so important in communication, and something that we've learned a number of years ago, is the importance of considering how you and your spouse each process information. So when it comes to increasing our connection with each other, have you ever felt like, you're communicating to your spouse and you're initiating a conversation with them, and it just seems like you're not breaking through, you're not gathering the responses that you're looking for? So this is just some insight on how you can develop a little bit more your conversation with your spouse. The idea behind it is that we all process information and process our world basically through three basic ways. And it's figuring out which one is primary for you, and we all are a blend of these, and which one's primary for your spouse. So here's how it works. First of all, some of us process our experiences through our feelings. So for those who process things through their feelings, generally you can tell who they are because they use feeling-oriented words. They'll use words like, well, this is how I feel about it. Or, so in my spirit, this is what's been going on. Or in my gut, I just sense. So they use feeling and sensory kind of words. And they'll ask questions that way too. They'll say, well, how do you feel about that? Or, what do you sense is going on? That's how you can tell generally if you or somebody else processes through their feelings. The second way people process things is visually. This is me. I tend to be a visual processor. So for them, life is just a series of images or films or videos that kind of goes by in their mind. And so they explain things using visually oriented words. They'll say things like, well, this is how I see it. Or when I look at it, I look at it this way. Or just, picture this with me. Imagine this with me. So it's just all picture oriented. And again, they would ask questions to say. They'd say things like, well, how do you see it? How do you look at the situation? And those are their words they'd use. That's how you can identify whether or not somebody processes things visually. The third area is cognitively, and this would be Heidi. Heidi processes things cognitively. So for cognitively processing people, they think about things, and they think about things a lot. And so they use words that would trigger that. They use words like, well, I think this, or I believe that, or here's what I know. Or they'll ask questions like, what do you think? So, we're all a blend of these, but we all have primary ways of processing things as well. What I want you to do is just take a moment, turn to your spouse, tell your spouse which one you think is your primary way of processing information. And by the way, as your spouse tells you, don't try to correct them. Okay, we're not doing a conflict session this day. So just tell your spouse which one you think is yours, why you think it's yours. Go ahead and do that for a moment. So here's the challenge, all right? So any of us, these are not gender oriented. Any guy could be feeling oriented, any gal could be cognitive like Heidi. But let's just say that you have a feeling oriented wife, she processes things through her feelings, and she has a cognitive husband. And the wife says to her husband about something, she says, well, honey, how do you feel about it? He doesn't feel anything about it, right? And so, just doesn't. It's not like he's trying to stonewall her. He just doesn't feel anything. And so there's no real response. He's like, well, I don't know. But if she says, well, honey, what do you think about it? Oh, I'll tell you what I think about it. I've been thinking about this a lot. And that's how it can work well in a conversation. So if your spouse processes things differently than you do, one of the ways you can unlock the conversation is by asking them questions that are going to trigger the way they process information. The same thing can work with your kids. It can work with people that you work with, people in church. So, it's a really powerful way to kind of have some fun with it. And even this weekend, as you're taking the breaks and stuff, just pepper your conversations with your spouse around some of these words and the way they process information.
Well, we've talked about the importance of listening and communication, but there's another important aspect of communication, and that's ownership when speaking. Ownership when speaking. In our marriages, we often have to address a difficult issue with our spouse, and it can be easy for either of us to become defensive. And one way that we can minimize this defensiveness and just avoid this is through ownership. And there's 3 primary ways to show ownership that I'm going to talk about. The first one is through I feel statements, or you can even say I think statements or I see statements. Counselors and therapists use this all the time. And I'll give you an example of this. Let's say that I made this great meal for Brad, and he comes home late. And I'm really frustrated because I'm doing everything that I can to keep this meal warm, but I'm getting really concerned that it's going to get cold. So he walks in the door, and I can turn to him and I can just say kind of sarcastically, well, look who's finally home. It's about time you showed up. I hope your meal's not too cold. Or I can say, Brad, I'm really glad you're home, and I hope you had a great day at work. But I just have to tell you, it's really hard on me when I cook dinner for you and you don't let me know ahead of time that you're going to be late because I feel disrespected. I've worked really hard to make this meal for you, and I want it to taste the best for you that it can, and I want it to be warm for you. In the second statement, what I did is I owned my feelings because I said, I feel. By doing that, I didn't blame Brad for being late. By saying I feel, Brad can't argue with my feelings because my feelings or my thoughts or the way that I see something is my feelings or my thoughts or the way that I see something. And my feelings are just that. They're my feelings. So it starts our whole discussion out on a better tone. Author Jimmy Evans says our goal in marriage should be to create an atmosphere where you both feel free to share. You have to feel safe. No one wants to be judged for the way that they feel. A healthy marriage offers a place for one person to share any appropriate feeling or emotion and know that it will be respected. A second way to communicate ownership is be specific about what you'd like versus complaining. In other words, don't hint to your spouse or expect your spouse to read your mind. Your spouse can't read your mind. And so you're setting yourself up for disappointment, and you're really raising the whole thing of expectations when you do that. Be direct with your spouse, but do it in a kind fashion. A third way to express ownership is actually a tool that Brad and I use in our marriage, and it's kind of fun. What we'll do is to help us determine how important an issue is to both of us, we'll rank or we'll scale that issue on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most important. And scaling works well when partners can be honest with each other. It works well when you don't criticize your partner's scale and you go, really? You're a 9? Nah, I don't think so. Or when one partner doesn't list themselves as a 9 or a 10 all the time, go, let's see, that issue's a 10. That's a 10 for me. Oh, that's a 9 for me. Oh, 10. I'm a 10 on that for sure. Listen, you can't always be a 9 or a 10. So here's how this works in our marriage and how we kind of have a little bit of fun with it. Let's say that we're going to go to dinner. And let's say Brad wants to go to Cracker Barrel and I want to go to Applebee's. But we're not really telling each other that at this point. We're like, where do you want to go? And he's like, I don't know. Where do you want to go? And I'm like, I don't know. Where do you want to go? And then he finally goes, well, I guess I want to go to Cracker Barrel. And then I'm like, well, I was really thinking we could go to Applebee's. And so we're kind of at a little bit of a standoff. And so what we'll do is we'll say, okay, let's get out a sheet of paper and we'll write a number between 1 and 10, with 10 being the best on that sheet of paper. Or sometimes we'll just go 1, 2, 3, and we'll blurt out our numbers. I don't really care that much in this particular situation, so I ranked Applebee's as a 2. But Brad really cared, and he ranked Cracker Barrel as an 8. So guess where we're going? We are going to Cracker Barrel. It's just a fun way to bring some fun into your marriage and just kind of resolve some of those areas that could turn into a conflict. We're going to turn the corner now, and we're going to discuss very briefly 3 guiding principles for communication with our spouse. The first one is straight out of the Bible, and it's always tell the truth. Lanny Davis, who is an author, and he was also special counsel to President Bill Clinton, wrote a book entitled Truth to Tell. Tell it early, tell it all, tell it yourself. And I absolutely love the title of that book because I think it summarizes what we all need to do in our marriages. I'm going to tell you the title again. It's Truth to Tell. Tell it early, tell it all, and tell it yourself. Tell your spouse the truth, even when it's painful. As Davis says, we can never take bad news and just turn that into good news. But instead, what we can do is we can take that bad news and we can put it in its proper context. And as we do that, hopefully we can offer some hope to our spouse. Then we need to tell the truth early. In marriage, it is not good to wait to be discovered or found out. When we wait to tell the truth, that does not make the situation better. In fact, often when we wait to tell the truth, it makes the consequences way worse. Then make sure you tell all the truth. Don't think, oh, it's okay if I leave out this little piece of missing information, or maybe I'll leave this out. When you do that, all you're doing is destroying the trust that you have with your spouse. So tell all the truth, and then finally, tell it yourself. There's nothing worse in marriage than having to hear the full truth from a third party. Zechariah 8:16 says, "These are the things you shall do. Speak the truth to one another." The second principle for communication is, as you communicate to your spouse, practice building up your spouse instead of tearing them down. Have you ever been out with a couple, or maybe they've been in your home, and they start telling a story, and they end up correcting each other or arguing over a trivial detail? Kind of works like this. The husband will say, "Monday night, when I was sitting down to watch Monday Night Football," and the wife will go, "No, it wasn't Monday night. It was Tuesday night." "No, it was Monday night." "No, it was Tuesday night, Monday night, Tuesday night." And they're sitting there arguing right in front of you, and you're like, wow. Unless you're in a court of law, trivial matters and details really don't matter. Proverbs 15:26 says, "Gracious words are pure in God's sight." I recently took a seminar, and here's something that I learned. It's the difference between two little words. These two little words can make a huge difference in your marriage. The words are "and," the other word is "but." I want you to listen to these two sentences. "Brad, I like it when you drive, but you drive way too fast." Or I can say, "Brad, I like driving in the car with you, and I'm concerned about how fast we're going." Let me say those again. "Brad, I like it when you drive, but you drive way too fast." Or, "Brad, I like driving in the car with you, and I'm concerned about how fast we're going." In the first sentence, by using the word "but," I have immediately put Brad on the defensive. If he feels like he's getting attacked, that would be natural. But in the second instance, I sort of softened the blow by just simply using the word "and." I sound more respectful. I don't sound as harsh. And I've also owned it because I've said, I'm concerned about how fast we're going. So even today, practice in your marriage, practice replacing the word "but" with the word and watch your communication improve as you refresh and reset your marriage.
And the third thing is keep your speech pure. Have you gotten lax in your marriage, maybe with the ways that you talk to each other, maybe with some of the humor? It used to be kind of cute humor, but over the years, it's kind of developed into this sort of dripping sarcasm that has been more biting and more cutting. Or maybe name calling has come into your marriage, or exaggerated characterizations have dripped into the way that you speak to one another. And we've just got to become vigilant, men and women, with the words that we use and the way that we speak to one another. I want to show you a verse on the screen here from Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29. It says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up, according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." I mean, think about this in the context of just marriage. If we practice this one verse in the way that we communicate with each other, and we practice just, watching what comes out of our mouths and how we speak to one another. That word unwholesome, by the way, in the original language, in the Greek language, it means putrid. Give you a story that kind of illustrates what that would be like. A number of years ago, well, the best man in our wedding, his name is Randy. Randy's littlest brother and Randy's mother were at a wedding reception for somebody that was in our church that we grew up in. And this family was very comfortable, and so they were able to have 400 of their closest friends for a 7-course meal to celebrate their daughter's wedding, okay? Nicest place in Indianapolis is where it was held. And so our friend Randy and Randy's mom and Randy's little brother were seated at one of the back tables. They were the last ones served and everything. And it gets around to the time for the cake. And Randy's little brother, Philip, is like 6 years old at the time. And Philip was eating his cake, or looking at his cake. His mom was next to him. And his mom was taking a bite of cake and turned and talked to the woman next to her and engaged in conversation. Philip looked at his cake, and he taps his mom on the shoulder. Mom, Mom. Philip, don't interrupt me. I'm talking. Takes a bite of her cake, keeps talking. Mom. Philip, stop interrupting me. I'm in the middle of a conversation. Takes another bite of her cake. Mom, there are maggots in the cake. And there were. Okay? Too late. Everybody had been served. Heidi and I thankfully had a chocolate wedding cake, so we would have been able to tell. But it was a big deal. So here's the thing, though. The way you felt when you heard about maggots being in the cake and the idea of eating something like that is where that word unwholesome kind of comes from. It's like words that should not come out of our mouth at our spouse should turn our stomach like that. It's a great verse to memorize, Ephesians 4:29. Let's put it back up there if we could for just a moment. This is a great verse to memorize because it allows the Holy Spirit to bring it to mind as kind of a check in your spirit about the kind of words that you're using with one another in your marriage. When our kids were little, they spoke to each other, the way kids do, and, on each other's case and stuff. So we had them memorize this verse. It didn't help, but it was a good spiritual practice for our kids to go through, The thing is, Jesus wants so much more from us as husbands and wives in the way we communicate with each other. There's another verse that's been so helpful for me. It comes from Psalm 141, verse 3. It says, "Set a guard over my mouth, O Lord. Keep watch over the door of my lips." It's really a prayer that is being offered up saying, God, put like an angelic presence right here so that I don't say things I shouldn't be saying. If you struggle with the words that you use, if things come out of your mouth and you're like, I shouldn't have said that, I'm prone to anger or saying harsh words or whatever it is, this is a great verse to memorize and to use it as a prayer every morning. Just every morning, put it on your mirror, put it on your, post it up at your desk or whatever you need to so that you memorize it so that it becomes a prayer for you so you're watching the things that you say. Here's the deal. You want to invite God into the process of cleaning up your language and the way that you speak to one another. When you invite him into the process, I can promise you, based on the authority of God's word, that your speech will transform over time. And I know we've given you a lot to process. We're just throwing a lot of tools into your toolkit right now to be using, and we totally get that. But far be it from us to miss an opportunity to equip you to build your marriage so that you really can be refreshed and have a reset in the context of your marriage and have a marriage that is Christ-centered. So we encourage you. We want you to review your notes and have some fun doing some of those exercises as you look through them. Now, what we want you to do is just for a couple of moments, we're going to put a question up here on the screen, and we want you as a couple just to turn to one another, and maybe we'll have the question, maybe we won't. Yeah, here we want you to, we just want you to talk together for a couple of moments, give you about 2 minutes. Where are we weak in communication? Based on what we've heard, or maybe something God's prompted you with, where are we weak in communication and how can we make it stronger? Just take 2 minutes as a couple and turn to one another and talk about that. So there's another question I want you to see, and then perhaps you can talk about it as couples. I want to honor our break time, but I want to put it up here for you. And the second question that we're going to put up here for you, and you can talk about this perhaps during your break. Let's go to the next slide if we could, please. Share with your spouse, back one. Share with your spouse an area that you plan to improve on in your communication. So we're not going to do that right now. Hopefully during the break you can just kind of lean over and say, here's what I think. And what I want you to do is be gracious toward your spouse with whatever God has put on them to work on. Don't say, well, what about this? Aren't you going to work on this too? Don't do that, okay? I want to make sure this is a positive experience for everybody and that they're working on something, that God's put on their heart. I want to let you know just real quick, too, before David Dean comes out and kind of gives us our instructions for the break. We have a book table that's out in the lobby area where you're going to be getting your coffee and things, too. And I want to walk through with you real quickly just the books that are there if you're interested. These are all, for those of you watching online, these are all available on Amazon as well. One of them is a book that's called Build Your Marriage One Day at a Time. And Heidi and I wrote this book. It has 366 questions, and inside it's got places for you to write down your responses to each of these. Sometimes it's like, what are we going to talk about, or how can we grow our marriage even deeper? And this doesn't have a lot of, it's got a couple of softball questions in there, but they're good, thoughtful questions. And right out of the chute, it starts with a pretty challenging question. But this is some couples, I know one couple that grabs a question and they talk about the question when they go walk the dog. Another couple takes this with them on trips. And they talk about it when they're in the car. So anyway, it's a great tool to help you just develop communication in the context of your marriage. Then we wrote it's called Build Your Marriage with Couples of the Bible. It's a small group study for small groups, but you could do it as a couple as well. You just need to know the context was for groups. And it looks at 8 different couples in the Bible and takes you through conversations and application from your life. And these are couples that did it right, some couples that didn't do it right in the context of their marriage. But want to be sure you know about this resource. And we have these all available individually as well as the first 2 as a bundle. The last book is one that Heidi and I wrote over COVID. And it's called Ruined to Recovery, Help When the Affair is Discovered. Every single one of us knows somebody who's been through this kind of a challenge. Maybe you have. Hopefully not. Heidi and I wrote this book thinking, man, we hope it's the book nobody ever needs. But the reality is it was an Amazon bestseller in its category as soon as it came out because couples need help. And so it's a great book to have on hand. You might want it for a family member or a friend you know that's going through this, or at least to be aware of it as a resource that's available too. It's written so that it can be read very quickly because people in pain and trauma don't want to sit through and sift through a lot of stuff. They want to know exactly what they need to do. So the first third is written to the offended. The second third of the book is written to the offender. And the last third of the book is written for the couple who wants to work on their marriage. So we wanted to be sure that you knew about those 3 resources as well.